So you heard the news about Native Instruments filing for insolvency. And so I know that many people is discouraged. Some of us, actually many of us, are worried for the future of many pieces of technology that mean a lot to us, either creatively, artistically, and as business infrastructure as well. And in this regard, I'm referring to Kontakt, which is reportedly the most valuable asset for Native Instruments. And being a developer of Kontakt libraries, I'm of course concerned about what is going to happen in the following months. Do you know how they say that a pessimist might leave borderline miserable, but on the upside might end up seeing things a little bit more clearly? So, as I qualify as a pessimist, I can tell you that, frankly, I do not think that we should be too much concerned about the future of Contact. And this is not just a naive thought about how things are going to evolve. I just think that Contact is too entrenched in the everyday creative, artistic, and business life of so many of us. Is such a valuable asset. If you just think to how big is the ecosystem that gravitates around Contact, that is just very difficult to think that it's just going to shut down overnight. So in this concern, in this regard, I don't think that Contact is going to vanish in the thin air. Okay, the issue is who is going to own Contact as an asset? Is someone from the legitimate music technology world, which would be the best case scenario, someone who knows our community, who knows the needs and the ins and outs of our world. That will be the best case scenario. Or will it be someone that comes from the world of money, finances, trust funds? I'm not very competent in that field, but one thing that is certain is that when that kind of people meddle with our world, very rarely we have a positive outcome. So let's cross our fingers that someone of the major players in the music technology business shows up, at least to protect Kontakt as the valuable resource that is to many of us, composers, sound designers, developers, etc. Now the thing is, regardless of what actually brought Native Instrument to this current situation, I think this could be a good opportunity to discuss a little bit about the things that, in my honest opinion, should be improved in Kontakt. So let's try to take this as an opportunity to think about the improvements that maybe a future right holder might decide to bring for Kontakt and make it even better. And for the avoidance of any doubt, I feel immensely indebted to Native Instruments because, let's face it, small developers like me and many other people that I know, we would have hardly had the opportunity to make a living, essentially, make a profitable business out of our creation if it wasn't for the Kontakt ecosystem that we have contributed to nurture along the years. I mean, it's 2 decades of sample libraries that are developed by independent people like me, like many others. So I really feel that we are all indebted to Native Instruments. But let's discuss a little bit the things that I think should be improved for Kontakt purely from the perspective of someone that creates libraries. Well, the very first thing, technically speaking, I think that Kontakt lags behind in terms of the synthesis capabilities. There have been many other soft synth samplers that came later to the game, and the first one that comes to my mind is UVI Falcon. And by the way, I purchased my license. I'm not saying what I'm going to say because of sponsorship or any of that. It's just my genuine opinion as someone who uses Falcon, has been using Falcon in the last 10 years or so. Well, Falcon has great sampling capabilities, either conventional sampling, let's say a la Kontakt, so to speak, but also advanced sound mangling capabilities. You have very advanced time stretch, IRCAM algorithms. IRCAM is the institute in Paris that is on the front line of innovating audio, but also has a number of interesting synthesis capability, very advanced, from virtual analog synthesis to physical modeling, so on and so forth, FM. Well, I think that Kontakt lags in that realm, and this is one of the reasons I think why you might notice that in the Kontakt libraries, libraries products fall always in a given number of templates, so to speak, quote unquote. All the libraries that are released, they belong to these to one of a limited number of typologies of libraries. Okay, you might think, okay, this is because this is what works on the market. For example, solo violin, solo clarinet, solo voice, or orchestral stuff, or percussion, or sound design oriented stuff. These are these categories that most of the products tend to fall into, and you might think that it's mostly a market related reason. Well, I kind of agree to this. There is some truth in that, but there is also a more basic reason, is that no piece of technology is, let's say, neutral. Every time that you use a piece of technology, regardless if it's a Kontakt or a DAW or whatever, it will always tend to drag you towards a given way of doing things, even those which are supposed to be transparent workflow wise. Maybe very, very versatile. I'm a user of Ableton Live, I absolutely love it, but every DAW seems to suggest in a very silent way doing things in a given way, because it's the way you interact with technology, right? It's normal. I'm not saying that the developers of these technologies want us to work in a given way. It's just the fact that you're using a technology and you tend to work in this way or that way according to that piece of technology. And Kontakt is no exception. The reason why libraries are developed the way they are developed and they end up being what they are and sounding how they sound is because Kontakt in the development stage forces you, quote unquote, to do things in a given way. And I think that we desperately need some innovation in that realm, and putting synthesis into the equation would be immensely beneficial, not just necessarily to do, in the last couple of decades, synthesis has become a synonym of creating abstract, crazy, outer space kind of sounds or very aggressive bass lines, because the musical genres of these last 2 decades have used synthesis this way to create mostly abstract sound, which are absolutely great. But I think we can benefit from synthesis also when the goal is not that much to create this kind of abstract, more electronic sounds, but to, let's say, integrate what we do with sampling. I won't go too much into detail because I've been doing a lot of experiments in Falcon and other softwares, but I think that many of the problems that we have in sampling can be solved if we put synthesis into the equation. So you might ask, which is what problem? Well, very easily, the problem of ending up with gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of audio. With sampling you have to record every single sound, right, that will end up playing or interacting with other sounds within the library. Well, if we had synthesis, if we had advanced synthesis capabilities in Kontakt, we could save a lot of time, a lot of money as developers in recording all of this stuff and compensate with synthesis. Again, I won't go too much in detail because it's very technical, maybe a little bit boring, but I did some experiments also for the library that I'm developing where there are a lot of sounds that are, borderline realistic, surrealistic. I think that working in this gray area between rather than gray, let's say hybrid area between sampling and synthesis can yield to a lot of interesting new ideas that can innovate the game of sample-based instruments, right? So I think that hopefully, wishful thinking, Kontakt might be, innovating in this regard. Another thing that is much more technical. Well, in order to explain this, I need to give you a little summarization of how normally Kontakt libraries are developed. You record a number of things, okay? You record, for example, for a brass instrument or a wind instrument, you record a number of articulation. You record sustain, you record ornaments, you record legato transition, staccatos, and different dynamics. You acquire this monumental amount of audio. You squeeze it all together within the Kontakt instruments, which is organized in groups, in zones, etc. And via scripting, by using KSP, which is the scripting language of Kontakt, you decide which one of these chunks of audio that you have recorded and edited needs to be played, okay, or how they can interact with each other, okay. So this is the logic. You take a whole bunch of stuff that you have recorded, you put it into the sampler, and then via scripting you decide, how these sounds eventually will play when you interact, when you use the library. You might say, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that sometimes your idea requires to acquire a really large amount of audio. And this results, if you want to squeeze all together in the Kontakt instruments, in a mammoth kind of instruments that can be just cumbersome to be used in a project in your DAW. And so the ideal thing, in my opinion, would be to use dynamic loading of samples, which means that you have your samples stored in a folder, and then via scripting you recall them within Kontakt when you have to use them, and then you cancel them, quote unquote, when you don't need them anymore, which is something that you can kind of do with Kontakt. I've been doing it with Cartago, our percussion library. I'm doing it with Gethen, which, by the way, is my forthcoming library. But it's something that can still be optimized. You know, sometimes when the sample is too large, it takes a little bit to load, especially if you have the library on an external hard disk. And so, you know, I think that in this regard, Kontakt could and should be improved. Then there is another thing that we should discuss, that we could discuss about. I think is a very worthy discussion about the possibility of create your own native sampler. You know, back then in the early 2000s, when Kontakt started to take the world, you know, as a mainstay of the sample-based instruments, if you wanted to develop sample-based instruments and sample libraries, you basically had two choices. First one was to create your own software infrastructure, your own sampler, or you use someone else's technology, which was Kontakt at the time, with a way lower barrier. You know, you could just concentrate on the artistic / creative / audio part and not worrying too much about, you know, more software engineering related kind of things. And so many people opted for the latter. And this is how we have created the ecosystem that we have to this very day around Kontakt. But fast forward 25 years, things are much different because there are many frameworks that allow us to create our own native samplers. One of these is Highs, which I'm studying as a side thing because, you know, I'm interested in getting a little bit more into the technical details of audio, you know, but also because there are some ideas that I have, you know, I'm moving more and more towards an idea of a hybrid instrument, not strictly sample-based instruments. And I realized that Kontakt as it is, you know, has too much limitation if you want to move outside of the aforementioned categories that I was discussing before, right? So now it's easier to create your own native sampler / hybrid sampler with synthesis capability. There are many more technologies and frameworks that allow you to do that. But, you know, I think that the future of these alternatives, if you want to call them like that, is something that we will see and judge in the next 6 months, where we'll actually see what is going to happen with the native instrument situation. Because my gut feeling is that people, during the last 2 years, after all those acquisition and grouping with other companies, trust funds, you know, all of that business thing, you know, people lost a little bit of trust in native instruments because, I mean, we are talking about the guys who gave us Kontakt, Absinthe, Reactor, FM8. I mean, some of the absolute classics of the last couple of decades come from that very same company. These guys have, you know, an impact on our life as creatives that we could never underestimate. I think that they are on par with Moog and Bokla and Oberheim, you know, those companies that made electronic music great in the 70s and the 80s. I think the native instruments are the equivalent of that in the modern days, if you want to count the last couple of decades, okay? And people were expecting from native instruments that they kept going with that same level of innovation. And that didn't just happen because Reactor basically was abandoned, despite being one of the most interesting things that many of us ever happened to put our hands on. Now they revived Absinthe with a new version. I didn't try it yet. I purchased it, but didn't manage to try it. But I'm reading great comments. I mean, people want that kind of company, I think, to go back to the basic, be innovators, be forward thinkers, be people that give us the tools that allow us to make the music of the future. And this is something that we desperately need right now, because when you don't have a creative force in the industry that pushes in that direction, then you have the business world that comes, you know, invading our world. And that's happening. It's happening with AI. Well, I am pretty much technology agnostic, you know. I do not have a interest of a crusade against this or that technology. I think that AI by itself can be something that can really actually benefit many of us. The problem is that many of these recent AI-based instruments, I won't name them, but you know which they are, they do not come from the music world. They have not been developed by people who have a music background. They are programmers, people from the computer science world, from the, I don't know, Silicon Valley kind of background. These are these people. They just see in our world a business opportunity. End of the story. Okay? And I think that we need desperately right now someone as big and as reputable and as powerful as Native Instruments to create a balancing force against all of this and give us, and I mean also even adopting AI, but in a way that they could adopt it in a brilliant and creative way, not something that is just taught by someone who doesn't know anything about us as music creators, music technology creators, sound designers, etc. So, of course, we all are keeping our finger crossed that things will find a relief at Native Instruments. There is people working over there, people with mortgages and with families and with dependents. So I think that these are definitely the very first one that we should think about and hope that things will settle in a positive way for them. And then there is the whole ecosystem to which we belong. Let's just cross our fingers that things will go the right way. So this was my take. And to conclude, I don't think that Kontakt is going anywhere, and neither do I. Bye.